everybody. Welcome to the New Market Alliance Church podcast, where you're invited to not just attend church or watch church or, in this case, listen to church, but actually go and be the church. For everything you need to know about our community, be sure to go to newmarketalliance.ca and maybe even drop us a line to let us know you're listening. We read everything you send and we'll be sure to get back to you. Our worship service happens every Sunday at 10 a.m. in person or streaming online. We want you to know you absolutely matter to God, and you absolutely matter to us. Everyone is welcome and wanted. Now, let's join today's teaching.
Good morning. It's really great to be here with you guys. It's been a long time since I've spoken any length, and it's a real honor. I want to thank Jonathan for inviting me to share my story. And I'm going to try and do a few things this morning. There's a little bit of teaching in there, but mostly I'm just going to tell you my story, and hopefully you'll be able to appreciate and relate to some of the things that I'll share. I think I can confidently say that probably everyone who follows Christ will have some touch points, and if at the end of all of this you really would like to, hang out and talk and pray about anything that's going on, and you feel that I have something to share, I'd be happy to help, happy to pray with you, come alongside. We are all just pilgrims, aren't we? We're just followers of Christ. None of us are special. None of us have, we're not better than anybody else. And my story is just my story. And I know that there are those of you in this room who have stories that are way more traumatic than mine. And I don't pretend to make it into something that it isn't. But it's what happened to me, and it's my life, and so I share it for what it's worth. I'd like to start, however, by dealing with a persistent rumor here at NAC, and that is that I come from South Africa. Now, I can tell you exactly when this rumor started. It was approximately the year 2000 when my wife, Megan, and I and our kids started coming to NAC, and we got involved. And I shared a story one morning, some of you may recall this, around Thanksgiving. I was very taken by the proclamation by Abraham Lincoln around Thanksgiving in the U.S. Why did they proclaim it a national holiday? And so I got up and I shared this, and David made a comment at the time. He said, "You'll really appreciate this considering where Don comes from." And I remember thinking, well, I come from Waterloo. Like, what do you mean where I come from? And so this rumor got bedded into the church, and no word of a lie, I still run into people who think that I come from South Africa. Now, I am not ashamed if I, to say that I don't or I did or whatever. That's not the point. My lovely wife comes from South Africa. And by the way, Megan could not join us this morning because she's up north ministering to a whole bunch of ladies at a retreat. So God bless her, Lord, use her. So like I said, I grew up in Waterloo, and I had a pretty sort of normal life, lived in a rural environment, and I always had an interest in science, and I was a, average student, really. But as I got a little older, I started to really take an interest in science, and eventually I went to university. I went to McMaster University, and I did a degree in biochemistry, so that's kind of like my scientific background. And at the end of my years at McMaster, I really had been exposed to youth with a mission. Almost everybody I knew in Kitchener-Waterloo and Cambridge area, all of my friends had either been to YWAM or were going to YWAM. Those were the days. And the YWAM base was actually in Cambridge. It had moved from Dunham, Quebec, and moved to Cambridge. And so there was always stuff going on in the summer. They had these summer of services. We'd go out on the streets, we'd preach, we'd do all kinds of stuff. It was great. And so I wanted to go to YWAM, but I didn't want to go to Cambridge because that's like, next door. I wanted to do something exotic. So I decided to go to England. And in 1982, I got on an airplane and I flew to the base in the UK. And I met, I'm getting ahead of myself. It was great, loved YWAM. If you know anybody that's ever been, once you're a YWAMer, you're a YWAMer for life. And, but during the course of that 5 months that I was there, I met this very nice young lady from South Africa, to whom I've been married now for 43 years. Is it 43? Oh, I probably got that wrong. Sorry, honey. Anyway, a long time, and we've been through lots. And so we developed this relationship. Now, during a YWAM school, you're not allowed to have a relationship. And there's all these rules and stuff. And so at the end of the school, we decided that we really did have something special. And so we were encouraged to go and see the leadership team and tell them about it, which we did. And we were all very, submissive and everything. And they just said, look, we think if this is of the Lord, then you should go back to your respective countries and see what happens. And I'm sure behind the scenes they're going, that'll never last. She's from South Africa. It's like worlds apart. Well, when you know it, our relationship developed over the miles, and much to my parents' chagrin, on June 25th, 1983, I got on an airplane to this place on the other side of the planet, literally. And I decided to go to graduate school there in South Africa at a university most people couldn't even pronounce. But it was a pretty famous university in Johannesburg. They turned out a couple of Nobel laureates from that school. And I did a degree in medical biochemistry, so kind of added more of a medical component. And so began a career that's lasted many, many decades in the pharmaceutical, biotechnology industries, and then later on in the cell therapy industries. I'll explain that a little bit later. And so it was a great career. I enjoyed it. And at the same time, as Jonathan mentioned, I got involved in ministry with Reasons to Believe, which is a science and faith sort of think tank. So I was using the science both in terms of ministry as well as in the workplace. And like I said, I had a pretty good career. I worked for a number of companies. And we lived in South Africa for 14 years. So I was there a total of 14 years. And we came back to Canada in 1997. And we were part of the Vineyard Church initially and eventually landed here at NAC. And we were here for many, many years. So that's sort of the background, if you like. So I was working at a large pharmaceutical company in Toronto. And they were actually the company that brought us back to Canada, all expenses paid. It was pretty amazing. And I don't want to say the name of the company because I know we're online and we're live here, but it's a fairly well-known Canadian company. And I worked there for nearly 20 years. I had a variety of different jobs and things that I did. I was last working as the director for a biopharmaceutical program that we were developing. It was an 8-year program. It had a budget of about $1 billion. And in that year, my last year there, I was responsible for a budget of about $150 million. So it was a, pretty substantial role that I was playing. But on January 31st, 2017, everything in my life changed. Everything. I went into work, normal day, meet with the team. And then I got a call from my boss who said, hey, Don, could you come to my office at 10 o'clock for a meeting? No, my boss would call me all the time to come for meetings. And so I didn't suspect a thing, not a thing. I walk in there and the HR person is there and I went, oh no, because I'd seen this movie before in other people's lives. And sure enough, it was, thank you very much, Don, but you're done. It was surreal. For those of you who've ever lost your job, I don't know about you, but for me, I went into life just stopped and everything, tunnel vision. I didn't believe it. I thought maybe I'll wake up and this will all be a bad dream. But I knew, of course, that wasn't the case. And the way they do this is it's pretty, bang, 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 bang. They don't give you a lot of time to kind of, start sobbing and crying and, getting all emotional and running down the halls and screaming. They don't let you do that. They shuttle you into a room and you meet with this professional, person that's going to help you transition into your new life. It's like, are you kidding? I liked my old life, thank you. Could I have that back? And I remember sitting there and the guy's telling me, he pushes this piece of paper in front of me that's got all the details of, the package and everything they're going to give you. And I'm going, I can't hear a word you're saying, not one word. And my pulse was just pounding, right? Just pounding in my head. And I'm completely disoriented. And I think we have a little video here of kind of what it was like for me. This is really short, but...
Welcome to the desert of the real.
Yeah, definitely that's what it was like, Poor Neo, just couldn't believe it. The desert of the real world. So there's a lot of feelings, a lot of emotions that I went through. I'm sure you've heard about it. You go through the disbelief, you go through the anger phase, you go through the sort of, what can I do about this? How can I get back? Whatever. You go through all these different emotions, and that's just in the first 2 minutes. And then you recycle back through that again. So eventually, they kind of escorted me out the door. The head of security for the company came and did that, which was kind of nice because he was a friend, and he was nice about it. But it was like, okay, here we go. Now it's my turn, and other people had left the company. But one of the things that happened right away, which was just devastating for me, was I had a BlackBerry at the time, and I know for some of you it's like, what's that? Anyway, but I made the mistake, and they warned us about this. They said, don't keep anything personal on your BlackBerry because it's corporate, right? And if you ever, if they ever want to, they can just wipe it all out, everything. So I had photographs, really special ones, my grandma's grave in Wingham, and I had all kinds of things on my phone that were really important to me, never mind a contact list of like 300-400 people. And as I walked out the door, the BlackBerry is wiped clean. I couldn't even phone my wife. I was like, I'm now in my car with a essentially giant paperweight for a BlackBerry, and I'm going, what do I do now? Like, I was completely lost. So I thought, well, who can I see? So I thought, well, my son Nick is right around the corner, and he worked at a company just 2 blocks away. So I kind of drove over there, and I knocked on the door, and I told him, that I was there, and could I see Nick? And, my son came out, and I told him what happened, and he said, all right, Dad, well, let's go for a coffee. So we went, we sat down, we had a coffee, and I remember feeling pretty emotional, and, dads are supposed to be there for their kids, and here's my poor son, Nick, having to deal with me, being a little bit emotional. And to his credit, he just said, Dad, you know what? You're gonna be okay. And sorry. So having Nick there was really great, but now I had to face going home. And what am I going to do when I get home? So I got home. Megan wasn't there. But eventually she came home from whatever she was doing, and she walked in the door, and I just said, honey, I've lost my job. Some more tears, more emotions. And it was that night that I really discovered the power of community, because I turned to 2 of my dearest friends who had been part of the cell that we were in for many years. And I lived across the road from Keith and Elizabeth. And so I told Keith what's happening, and he called Kevin, and Kevin came over, and the 2 of them sat down with me in Keith's house. And they just let me talk. They just let me, let it all out, the whole 9 yards, all this snot and trauma, everything, and they were just there for me, right? And I'm so grateful to the two of them for that moment, because it got me through it, and they were, of course, encouraging. Of course, they were saying all the right things, but still, everything was just like a blur. About 6 months prior to this day, I had booked to go and see a concert with John Asbury and his daughter, Michelle. And it was a concert with a guy called Neil Morse. How many people have heard of Neil Morse? Okay, a few of you. Okay, good. Well, by the end of today, you're going to know a lot more about him. He's a Christian prog rocker, for lack of a better term, progressive rocker. And he writes these fantastic concept albums. And so that night, we were supposed to go to this concert. And I turned to Megan and I said, honey, I don't feel like going to a concert, now, after everything that's happened. I just want to sit at home and be miserable, basically, is what I was saying to myself. And she said, well, I really think you should go. And I said, but eventually I did. So we went to the concert down in Toronto, and that night, I didn't know, I knew none of the songs. This is a concept album. It was brand new, so we're listening to the concert. It was pretty amazing. And halfway through, there was this song called The Breath of Angels. And I remember standing there going, Lord, this is, thinking about my life. What am I going to do? I was so concerned, obviously, having lost my job. What about the future? Am I going to be able to are we going to have to sell the house? Am I going to lose? Am I going to chew up all of our investments because I'm old and I'm not going to get a job, and all these thoughts, And this song, Breath of Angels, turned out to be like a worship song for me. And the words are really powerful. And in fact, it's so powerful that when I talked to Jonathan about it, he said, well, I think we should play it. So we're actually going to play it later. I had never been a consistent journaler. I've written stuff down in my life. I've been a Christian since 1973, and I kept various things. I would write stuff in, whenever I felt there was something really cool that I wanted to write down, but I wasn't consistent in my journaling. But all of a sudden, one of the real benefits of losing your job is that you have time. You now have time on your hands, and it's like every day you have time. So it was like, okay, so maybe I should spend more time, reading my Bible, praying, and maybe, so I started to write some things down, and this is my journey. This is now what I want to share with you. So, from Matthew 6, I heard a sermon around about that time was talking about not worrying about tomorrow, but to trust in God, right? You all know the passage in Matthew 6. And the question that I wrote down was, can I really trust God to provide for me when lots of people around me who were my age and even younger were not finding work? It's easy to say, oh, well, God's going to look after you, as in he will give you a job, which is the way I was thinking. And I was concerned because maybe I won't. Look at that guy. Look at that guy over there. I mean, he's been 18 months. He still doesn't have a job, And I started going into this spiral down. And from Psalm 13:5, I read, I trust in your unfailing love. But when I read it, I was aware I didn't. I wasn't trusting in God's unfailing love. I was full of fear, okay? When we get into trouble, we typically run to God, right? But when we're not in trouble and life's going along pretty cool, we're just ticking and bopping. God kind of can slide over to the side, and we forget about him, and we're not consistent in our relationship with him. That certainly was me. I was running to God at this point, but I was running to God to talk him into doing something that I wanted. What did I want? I wanted a job. I wanted to get back to normal life, right? I wanted him to fix my problem. but he wanted me to want him. I didn't know this then. Anyway, March, we had booked to go on a trip with some friends to South Africa. And again, I was humming and hawing. I said, "Oh, honey, I need to be here. I need to be networking. I need to get out and, pound the pavement, look for work." And but we went off. And so we're in South Africa, and we went on this sort of hike one day. And I was standing literally like this on a sort of a rock that was down. There was like a little beachy area. And I'm standing there like this, and I'm watching, friends sort of walking around. And all of a sudden, this leg that just slipped right out from underneath me. And I went down, and I hyperextended my knee, and I tore my Achilles tendon, all just like that, bang. And it was really, really sore. I remember Kevin was there. He came up and he said, "What can I do? What can I do for you? What can I do?" Because he knew that was like, he didn't even know what happened. But there I was, and I'm a runner, okay? I love to run. Well, especially then, I love to run. And guess what? Now I'm watching that go up in smoke. So here I am. I'm all stressed. I don't have a job, and I was using running to at least get rid of some of that anxiety, and I could get out there and run and feel better about everything. Well, now I can't run. Now I'm hobbling around. Anyway, so I spiraled even further down, right? And I started to question, God, where are you? What are you doing? But it was right at that time in March that I first read Exodus 17, 1-7, and I was introduced to this term, the waters of Meribah. And we'll come back to that in just a moment. So April, I became aware that all my hard work to find a job was really born out of fear, anxiety, and worry. That's what was driving me, okay? And people were telling me, "Don, why don't you just relax? Enjoy the summer, Take your foot off the gas. Just relax and, stop all this, And I'm going, if I do that, I'll never get a job. And I was saying to Megan at the time, I said, honey, I've always been frustrated that it seems like I can explain my life, And I wish just once, God would do something for me out of the blue, just right out of the blue, where I can't say that I had anything to do with that. Okay, that's a spoiler alert. Just remember the out of the blue, okay? I'm going to come back to that too. So fast forward, get to August. I was networking like crazy. They taught us how to do that. That's one of the great things of having a executive exit sort of counseling. And a lot of jobs would really get hot, and then they would die. And I was networking with tons of people. I was spending money driving all over the place, no job. I began to despair again. And then some well-meaning person said to me, "Well, I think God is stripping away things to build your character." Well, that was really encouraging. I said, "Oh, okay, so God's whole purpose in my life right now is to strip stuff away even more. I've already lost my job. What else could he take?" And I was really starting to accuse God of just wanting to take things out of my life. And I'm saying all these things to you this morning candidly and somewhat ashamedly. I got to a low point. I'm going to tell you the low point. I was praying. I forget where I was exactly. But I remember saying to the Lord these words. I said, "Lord, I know what I'm doing today. What are you doing?" It's a good thing God has got big shoulders and that he's confident in himself and doesn't worry about his people and what they might say. But I am ashamed that I got to that point. So on the 8th of November, 2017, it had been 10 months. and I had received yet another rejection from yet another company, and I felt pretty down. And I sat down for my quiet time, and I read Psalm 95, where this Meribah place is mentioned again, and it sounded familiar. So I decided maybe I should investigate what this is all about. And so I just want to share the passage. We're going to pull up those slides, and we'll read through them together. And I'm just going to read directly from my Bible here so I don't have to look at the slides. So let's read Exodus 17. This is starting at verse 1. At the Lord's command, the whole community of Israel left the wilderness of Sin, which is Sinai, by the way, and moved from place to place. Eventually they camped at Rephidim, where there was no water for the people to drink. So once more the people complained against Moses. "Give us water to drink," they demanded. "Quiet," Moses said. "Why are you complaining against me, and why are you testing the Lord?" But tormented by thirst, they continued to argue with Moses. "Why did you bring us out of Egypt? Are you trying to kill us, our children, and our livestock with thirst?" Then Moses cried out to the Lord, "What should I do with these people? They are ready to stone me." The Lord said to Moses, "Walk out in front of the people, take your staff, the one you used when you struck the water of the Nile, and call some of the elders of Israel to join you. I will stand before you on the rock at Mount Sinai. Strike the rock, and water will come gushing out. Then the people will be able to drink." So Moses struck the rock as he was told, and water gushed out as the elders looked on. Moses named the place Massah, which means test, and Meribah, which means arguing or quarrel, because the people of Israel argued with Moses and tested the Lord by saying, "Is the Lord here with us or not?" So, I don't know about you, but I have a tendency to read the Old Testament and look at the people of Israel and basically go, what is the matter with you people? You're just a bunch of whiners. Like, you're walking around, you complain. God does these fantastic miracles. Like, he split an entire, part of the Red Sea in half so they could walk through. And then it seems like just the next day they're going, "Well, we don't have anything to eat." Well, okay, you think that's a problem for God? Like, he moves oceans apart. And then so he gives them food. And then, but we don't like this. And we wish we had the leeks and the onions back in Egypt. And it's like you read this stuff and you go, man, what is wrong with you people? Well, I have a new respect for the children of Israel. I really do. Because I want to show you where they were when they started complaining. So we can go to the next slide, Liz. So this is just a picture. It gives you an idea. Oh, gee, look at that. There's a place, lots of Tim Hortons around, 5-star service, you just have to call on your cell phone and they'll show up with a drone and drop a nice package. No, none of that, okay? Maybe look at look at that. It's a little parched, isn't it? I'm getting thirsty just looking at it. In fact, maybe I will have a glass of water. Looks like there used to be a river there, maybe. Kind of like, hard to say, right? So you get the picture. They were in this place where there was no water. And when we read no water, I mean no water. Now, I've actually been to this place. We went on a trip to Israel, and one of the cool things we got to do was we drove into the wilderness of Sinai, and then they marched us off the bus with water bottles, which I thought was wimping out. But anyway, they marched us off the bus, and we walked for quite a while, and there was this one lone tree, like way over there, and we walked all the way to that tree. By the time we got there, we were hot. And, of course, there was this, talk about this whole situation. So I want to just draw out a few key points, and you'll see how this relates to my journey. So the first thing that we see from the passage is that the people didn't randomly end up in the desert. It's not like they got up one morning and said, let's just walk into the desert. No, it says that they responded to the Lord's command. So who's in charge of how they got there? God was in charge. They were led by the Lord to a place of no water, apparently. They were led there by the God of love and grace and joy and peace. He took them to this place. They were in real danger of dying from lack of water. It wasn't fake. It wasn't like they were just complaining because it had been a while since they'd had their Starbucks. It was a real danger. It says that they were tormented by thirst. Let me tell you something. None of us in this room, or I doubt any of us, have been tormented by thirst. We get thirsty. We work, oh, I'm a little thirsty. Maybe you've had a situation where you weren't able to get some water, but it didn't last very long. I mean, I think most of you know we can't live without water for 3, 4, 5 days. It's absolute max for human beings, depending on your situation. Mothers, obviously, were fearing for their children. Imagine being a mother in that situation. Your kids are crying because they're thirsty, and there's nothing you can do. Men were fearing for their families and their livestock, which basically was fearing for their investments, because that's what livestock represented. It represented their future. Starting to see a few connections here. Animals would die. Everyone would die. So where is God? Where is his faithfulness? Where is his blessing? Imagine yourself in this situation. Is the Lord among us or not? And when I read that, something just went bang. And I realized that God was speaking to me. You could just leave up that last slide, Liz, the one with that one. Now, I'm a scientist, so I looked at this and I went, well, hold on a second. Is this a case of a miracle, as in God manufactured water out of thin air? Or is this a miracle, as in God did the split the rock thing, but the water was there all along? Well, guess what? It turns out that in the Sinai, there are rivers, underground rivers. And I think, personally, that it's reasonable to assume that God knew exactly where the water was. The people didn't know. As far as they were concerned, there was no water, but God knew. Of course, the rock was a miracle. Strike a rock and the rock splits and out comes the water. That's pretty miraculous. It's further reasonable to assume that God intended to provide water for them, but they gave up trusting too soon. What if they had said, Moses, why'd you bring us out here? There's no water. We're all going to die. But God must have a plan. Is God going to care for? How is God going to do? He has to be able to. He wouldn't lead us here. He wouldn't have done what he did back then and then leave us all to die. So he must have a plan. Yes, Moses? But no, that's not what they did. They gave up. They were trusting for a while until things really started to not look so good. And then they stopped. So it was round about this time that I turned to Megan, and I'll never forget it. I said to her, honey, God's going to strike the rock in my life. Now, listen, those of you that know me, I'm not this big faith and power guy. I'm just don't go around with the, preach it and name it and claim it. I was never that kind of person. But I started to believe that I needed to say this, that it was a proclamation, that I needed to put my mouth where my faith was growing. And like I said, losing your job is not the most horrible thing that can happen to you. I'm looking out at the crowd here, and I know there are people here that have far worse stories. And I don't want to pretend that mine is anything like yours. I mean, we have people that have fallen off ladders and their life changed like dramatically. People have lost children. People have lost, people in their lives. So I'm not trying to make this out into something it's not. It's just what happened to me. I repented. I had been maligning God's character, accusing him of, you're just a mean old God. All you want to do is make my life miserable. I repented. I turned to the Lord and I started to say, Lord, I trust you that you will strike the rock in my life. So, you remember that out of the blue thing and the rock thing? Just remember this. So, 1 week later, just 1 week, I got a call from a senior executive of a stem cell research company that I had never heard of. And I began an engagement with them. At this point, I had decided to hang a shingle on my door that said consultant, and I started consulting. Again, I was encouraged by a dear friend to do that. And this person said, where they were from. Now, I don't have a contract with them or anything at this point, but fast forward, I did end up signing a contract and working for them. And the name of the company, I will tell you this, was Blue Rock. And it was the 17th of November that I got the call. Exodus 17, Blue Rock. I think God has a sense of humor. So I was supposed to work for them for about 3 to 6 months. That was the deal. That ended up lasting 3.5 years. I did some preliminary work for them, and then they said, gee, Don, that was great. Do you think you could actually come on board and run a program? And so they asked me to head up the cardiac program, which was involved in injecting cells into hearts to basically grow brand new heart tissue. I worked a little bit in Parkinson's disease, and I also worked in the immunology side with T cells. But the key is that during this time, working for this company, God restored many of the years and far more that the locusts had eaten. I was worried when I wasn't working that I was chewing through this package that I got, because it was, it's limited, right? And that I was going to start to chew through all our investments, and then I was going to end up, penniless. And God blessed me and us through this company. And then I worked for another company when that came to an end. And that company was called Turnstone. I said to the Lord, what's with the stones and rocks thing? Really? Come on. So I want to draw this to a close, and I want to just share kind of what I've learned about things since then. The thing I noticed is that Israel really suffered as they walked towards God's promises. Think about that for a minute. Suffering is when, your life's not going well. But what if God's plan for you to follow and get to the promises that he has for you actually require suffering? Because they suffered, not just once, not just twice, many times. I believe that life is about suffering as we walk toward his promises. Part of God's goal for us in this life is that we learn to have no other gods before him. The number one sin of Israel was not faithlessness and all that stuff. It was idolatry. They kept substituting other gods for the God of Sinai, the God that delivered them out of Egypt. And God had to, for their own sakes, get rid of that sin from the nation of Israel. And it's interesting that it took 2 major events later on. Exile to Babylon for Judah and exile to Assyria for Israel. Both of them were traumatic to the history of the nations of Israel and Judah. But it cured them of idolatry. I think that when I look at my own life, the temptation to substitute other things for God that He wants in my life is strong, and we have to deal with it. Since that time, I've been on a journey of renewal in my relationship with the Lord. I used to think that, I prayed this prayer in 1973, and I got filled with the Holy Spirit a little after that, and I read my Bible, and I pray, and I go to church, so I'm good. Tick, 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 tick. And, I'm going to heaven one day, and isn't that wonderful? And I've realized that that is not what it's about at all. It's about a real relationship with God, a love relationship where we walk with Him all the time, and that we can talk to Him, and He wants to talk with us. He wants to share His heart with us, but we need to come aside. We need to let Him. And we need to be sure that we have no other gods before Him. I haven't arrived at any kind of a, spiritual pinnacle. In fact, far from it. I'm learning every day through all kinds of circumstances and through all kinds of people. But seeking Him and knowing Him intimately is where I'm at right now. And maybe, perhaps another time, I can share more about that. So, God was faithful. But when I look back on the time, I still feel a little bit guilty because I didn't understand what I do now about His desire for intimacy with me. I look back on it and I realize, I got to a place of faith, but it was still just based on getting my life sorted. I had faith that God was going to do something, which is fine. It's good, but it's not as good as, Lord, I just want to be with You, and I'm going to love You, and I'm going to trust You. For all that other stuff, I'm going to put it aside for now because I want to just be with You. And I look back and I think, wow, so much of my seeking God was so I could get something. And there's nothing wrong with going to God and saying, God, I need help. There's nothing wrong with that. Don't mishear me. But what I'm saying is we need to start with, Lord, You are enough for me. I don't need You and the pots and pans. I just need You. Thanks for listening. I hope that you feel encouraged that whatever you're going through or whatever you've been through, that God has a purpose. You don't have to know what it is. You may not know what it is, but there's one thing you do know, and you can know, and you must know. And that is that whatever it is, He wants you. He wants you to draw near to Him. And when you do, He is sufficient. So, Jonathan always closes by saying, more than coming to church and doing church, go and be the church. And I always like that because it is who we are. We reflect Jesus. And the more we hang with Him, the more we are with Him every day, the more we reflect Him. And the more the world will smell Him around us and know that we've been with Him. So go in peace. If you'd like prayer for anything that you may be going through right now, there's people that will gladly come, and I'll hang around a little bit, and I'd be happy to pray with you. So go in peace. Go in Jesus' joy. Amen.